Welcome everyone for the latest installment in this continuing series on the pandemic, on vaccination, on return to campus, on so many other subjects that we've addressed here with you. We thank you for joining us again after a 2-week hiatus. There's a lot that's happened in this 2 weeks, as you're going to hear. Indeed, I wanted to begin just by noting what seems to me to be something of a turning point in the pandemic. And I'm offering this comment primarily for the benefit of those of you who aren't in New York City right now. If you're not here, if you haven't seen what's happened in the city, you would be quite amazed by what's developed, even in the last week or 10 days. There really does seem to be a revitalization that is welcome, long overdue. It's just different right now than it was, and it feels like a very good omen for what's ahead. So our panel today, we're going to start by focusing on vaccination issues and the mandate with Donna Lin, who is our COVID director and the chief operating officer at the medical center. She's going to offer an overview. We're going to address a lot of your questions over the course of this presentation, but as part of the opening, Melanie Burnitz, who is the Senior Vice President for Columbia Health, she's going to focus on the exemption process, which we know is a subject of great interest to many of you. And then Wafa El-Sadr, university professor and head of the public health group that's guided us throughout the pandemic, she's going to focus her opening presentation on the vaccination effectiveness and safety, which again, we know are very high priority questions. But let me turn it over to Donna. Welcome to all of you. And we hope this is another useful session for you.
Great, just in the nick of time. So welcome everyone. And I am going to share a couple of brief updates about where we are with respect to vaccinations in the US and locally, and then talk about our recent vaccine mandate, including some of the legal questions that I know that we've faced in the past, and then talk about literally how you begin to record your vaccination status. So you can go to the next slide. So a lot has happened, and when you think about it, just over really a 6-month period of time, we are getting very close to having 300 million doses of the vaccine administered in the US. About 63% of adults, people age 18 and over, have completed at least 1 dose. We have a significant number as the age has been lowered to 12 to 17-year-olds who are also getting dosed. And then from a perspective of adults, about 41%, a little over 41% have received their entire series. That could be 1 dose of J&J or 2 doses of the other 2 FDA-approved vaccines. And when you think about it, the population of the United States is about 330 million. Again, the 300 million doses could include 2 doses, but some significant numbers that we're seeing in the United States. Actually, New York is doing a little bit better than the average of the states. Over 19 million vaccine doses have been administered, and a little over 65% of adults have completed at least 1 dose. You can go to the next slide. And then just to give you a perspective in terms of New York City is doing quite well as well in terms of its vaccine administration. The city, with a population of a little over 8 million, has actually had 4.3 million people receive at least 1 dose and 3.6 million people who are fully vaccinated. This map simply shows you where the highest concentration is of adults who have been vaccinated, and you can see the darker the blue, the greater the percentage. And if you look at Manhattan, it's pretty dark. That is the borough with the best vaccination dosage. You can go to the next slide. So I want to talk about where we are in terms of supplying the vaccine. I think, as you know, we have been supplying the vaccine for faculty, staff, students, and even patients of Columbia doctors in 5 Columbia Doctor locations in Manhattan, in Suffern, and in White Plains. And in addition, at Lerner Hall in Morningside for students, and at Student Health at CUIMC. And faculty and staff can also get vaccinated at Lerner. And Melanie, I'm sure, will share a little bit of an update with us later on. And of course, there are hundreds and hundreds of locations, whether it's in New York City, New York State, or in the surrounding metropolitan area. At our own vaccine sites, we get the supply from the city or the state, depending on where we are. It varies. Predominantly, we have been administering Pfizer, but we have from time to time gotten supply of Moderna and J&J. We don't have a supply issue, and in fact, while in prior seminars, we've given you the information to be able to log on and get the vaccine, we will even take walk-ins as we can accommodate them. So supply is no longer an issue. But in spite of all of the great work that's being done on vaccines, we still are requiring face covering indoors. We are requiring that you go for testing if it's your first time on campus, if you're called for what's known as a surveillance test as well. And we have literally, I'm confident, and we'll talk about how to record your information, well over 14,000 faculty, staff, and students that we know of, but countless other individuals who've been vaccinated at other locations, whether it's in New York City, New York State, even outside of this area. You can go to the next slide. So we did issue a vaccine mandate a little over 2 weeks ago. The requirement for the vaccine mandate is for faculty, staff. It's also for students. We announced that earlier, several weeks earlier. We are asking you to get vaccinated as soon as possible, but by August 2nd to submit your information through Reopen CU app or through the website. I'll take you through that page and that process in a minute. We are not, this is not uncommon. Over 450 colleges and universities have announced a student vaccine mandate, and over 170 have announced it for faculty and staff. We are working on revising something that most of you who have been on campus are familiar with. When you go to your app, it's called the Columbia Compact. And that is being revised as well to reflect this change in the vaccine status, and it will also be implemented via the Reopen CU app. You can go to the next slide. So I want to talk about what vaccines are eligible, and then I'm going to show you a couple of quick slides to describe the process. So we have 3 vaccines in the US that I mentioned before that have emergency use authorization. There are also vaccines that have been given approval by the World Health Organization, and we are accepting a documentation of those vaccines. However, if individuals, and this perhaps applies much more to students than many faculty and staff, but others may have received a vaccine that is not WHO authorized, when they come to the United States, we will be providing revaccination for them using one of the 3 FDA vaccines that we have. We are working on our testing program, but we can tell you for now that vaccinated individuals on some level will be required to participate in our Columbia testing program that we have had in place for a good year now. Excuse me, and we are working on what the actual face covering policies will be. We are watching closely the CDC and New York State guidance as we do that. And then finally, all new hires who come to work for Columbia will be required to be vaccinated prior to them starting work beginning August 2nd. You can go to the next slide. So we've gotten a lot of questions about, is this legal? And in fact, there's been quite a bit of literature that's opined on that, in fact, employers can legally mandate the vaccine. The U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has advised employers that they can do that as long as they offer certain exemptions. And you'll hear from Melanie about the exemption process, and it's listed there below. whether it's disabilities that prevent the vaccination or sincerely held religious beliefs. Excuse me. We've also been asked questions about confidentiality. Who has this information? Does my boss, do my peers, people that I work with have it? And the answer is no. The only place that this information will reside is in human resources, and it is highly confidential and is obtained merely for the purposes of compliance. You can go to the next page. And a lot of people are familiar with HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability Act, that has some provisions around privacy. There are no privacy information. There's no privacy information that is at risk in doing this. This is not your medical record. This is simply record of compliance with a vaccine requirement. We will attest to you that we are going to protect this information and make sure that we will follow all best practices when it comes to privacy and security. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk about how you do this, and let me flip one page ahead so I can at least show you what hopefully you've seen as your app, the Reopen CU app, and then I'll go back to the instructions. So this is what you see daily in the Reopen CU app, which is available on your iPhone, your Android, or on the website. Excuse me. And if you look at this second section under the submit button called My Checklist, there is now a fourth button. There used to only be three. And it says, I have complied with the university's COVID-19 vaccination requirements. And highlighted in blue is faculty/staff. You click on faculty/staff. It will take you to the second half of the screen that you see in front of you, in which you document that and attest that you've received COVID-19 vaccination and that this information is accurate. You enter the date of your first vaccine, the type of vaccine, you enter the date of the second dose if that's applicable, and then you also enter the dose that you received. You upload by taking a picture of your vaccine card, which you got when you got vaccinated, and then you can upload that file. And go back to the prior page for 1 second. That's pretty much what I said on this as I described it. I'm going to go back ahead one more, and then I'm going to turn it over to Melanie because I do want to add one thing. The other thing you can do on your app or on the web is you can request an exemption that, as I mentioned, the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunities Commission has required that we offer. Last thing I just want to say is that you probably heard a lot of noise around May 13th. It was a Thursday when the CDC announced that fully vaccinated people can resume a variety of different activities without wearing masks. The governor of New York adopted those recommendations on May 19th. Up here on the medical center campus, this does not apply because we are a health facility and the CDC specifically exempted healthcare facilities. And as I said, Columbia still maintains a policy of requiring face covering regardless of your vaccination status when you are indoors. So the one change that really impacts all of us, if you're vaccinated, and the overwhelming majority of you will be by August 2nd, is that outdoors you are able not to wear your masks. And even so, you probably have heard from Anthony Fauci, from the president, and from the health department is that they still strongly recommend wearing masks in indoor settings where you don't know the vaccination status of the people around you. And so that's my section. I'm going to turn it over to Melanie to talk a little bit about how you take the next step if you are interested in seeking an exemption for medical or religious purposes.
Great. Thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Thank you for your attention today. Hopefully we've got some slides going to pop up shortly. While those are coming online, the first thing I just wanted to share, Donna mentioned, is just around vaccine availability. We are still offering vaccines on site. So for those of you still looking to be vaccinated, Learner Hall does have appointments available this week. Friday, there are appointments available, and any days there are appointments available, we also will accept walk-ins. So if you just happen to be in the area and want to get your vaccine. So keep checking the website. We're constantly updating that, either appointments or walk-ins. So we'll continue to have vaccines available. And I know Wafa is going to speak around the safety and the efficacy. So we can go to the next slide. I'm going to reiterate some of what Donna said and then give you a little more detail. So again, the vaccine requirement documentation needs to be submitted by August 2nd. In terms of which vaccines we'll accept, we're accepting the 3 FDA-approved vaccines. That's the Pfizer, the Moderna, and the Janssen vaccine. And then also any vaccine that has been recognized as safe and effective by the World Health Organization. And that's recognizing that individuals in our community may be receiving their vaccines at international destinations or locations. This list is constantly changing. The World Health Organization is reviewing these. So each week or so, we're hearing about a new vaccine that has been approved. So if you go to the website, the covid19.columbia.edu website, and in our FAQs, you'll find links so you're able to access which of the vaccines have been approved by the World Health Organization. That's something we're sharing as well with our international students. As you look at FAQs and some of the other documentation, you'll hear us talk about fully vaccinated. And so it's important to understand what fully vaccinated means. And that's where this 14 days becomes a real magic number. And full vaccination means 14 days after the second dose of a 2-dose vaccine. So that's the Pfizer and the Moderna doses in terms of the ones that are FDA approved, or 14 days after a single dose vaccine. That's only the J&J. So even if you get your dose, you're not considered fully vaccinated until 14 days after that series is completed. So that's really important to put into your planning around dates of getting vaccination. And then obviously the third piece of the requirement is uploading your record after you have been vaccinated. Again, on the website, there's a lot of instructions about how to do this to walk you through the app process. Next slide, please. Donna shared this, just leading into the religious and medical exemptions. There is that little button there at the bottom, I am requesting a medical or religious exemption, and that will lead you to the process in terms of how to do that. So the next slide. So we do have a very comprehensive process around the exemptions. We've been doing medical and religious exemptions from vaccinations for students forever. That's something that has been required. So we already have a built-in process for that. And regarding this process is going to be overseen by a panel that includes 6 physicians, obviously to review the medical pieces, religious life expert, and 2 human resources leaders. So this isn't being left to an individual decision. It is a committee process with the expertise. And it is also a singular process across all of our campuses and across all of our affiliates. So the same process for students, faculty, and staff. So really comprehensive, well-rounded process. We will review and then communicate these exemptions, the determination, whether it's an approval or a denial, within 15 days. If you do receive an approved exemption, either medical or religious, your app box will get checked. Because the app box simply says, I have met the university requirements. An exemption does meet the university requirements. We will also communicate with you what additional precautions you need to take that may include additional COVID-19 PCR testing, as well as face covering. And more information on that will be shared as we get towards the fall, because obviously there are a lot of other factors that play into this. If you do not meet the requirement, as Donna shared, or you don't get an approved exemption, you won't be permitted access to the university. Again, that is going to be managed through the app. And the next slide, please. So just giving you a little more detail in terms of how you go about applying for these exemptions. Obviously, this does recognize our commitment to a safe, inclusive, and supportive experience for all affiliates, including faith and medical contraindications. So the first step for everyone is completing the request form. There are different request forms for medical and religious exemptions. So once you check the box on the app page, you'll go to the page that provides information on how to submit that request. You will then see the paperwork that you need to complete, and we ask that you review this paperwork very, very carefully. It's a lot of detail required. On the medical exemption side, obviously you need to go through, read all the pieces around why you're applying for a medical exemption and provide supporting documentation from your clinician around the reason for that medical exemption. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Similarly, on the religious side, it's not only you completing the form, but providing some supplementary documentation on the reason for the religious exemption request. Once you have all that paperwork, you submit it, and these submissions are protected. And then the committee that I just described will consider all requests. It is important to add these are requests, approval is not guaranteed. Also want to highlight that there is a separate process for any workplace accommodation that is not necessarily linked to a medical or religious exemption. So your workplace accommodation request should follow the usual process, and it is a separate process going to leave management. For any medical and religious exemption, once the committee has reviewed these requests, you will get a determination letter with that decision that will be shared with you. We are not looking at personal and philosophical objections. These are just medical and religious exemptions. So you will get the outcome in a determination letter. Regarding the kind of medical exemptions, I think it's really important as you think through this to speak with your clinician about why you're requesting a medical exemption. There are obviously people who have allergies, and we know we get a lot of questions around that. But in terms of allergies to specific components of the COVID-19 vaccine, this is different to other vaccines. So if you have had in the past an allergic reaction, for example, to a flu vaccine, the likelihood is you wouldn't have an allergic reaction to the COVID-19 vaccine. So it's really important to understand what component of a vaccine you are allergic to in the past to see if that would cross over to a COVID-19 allergic reaction. And then also understanding, given that there are two different types of vaccine available, if you are allergic to one, you maybe wouldn't be allergic to the other. So really important to discuss that with your clinician before submitting a medical exemption request for allergy. Similarly, in terms of which medical conditions maybe would apply for an exemption request, in most cases, actually the COVID-19 vaccine has been determined to be safe, effective, and actually necessary because of reducing risk. And I'm sure Wafa will talk more about that. So again, this may be a different exemption consideration than you may have had for other vaccines in the past. So hopefully that provides a little more detail in terms of the process, and I'm certainly happy to answer more questions. I think over to Wafa.
I do not have slides today. I think I was just going to talk a bit about some of the updates in terms of data on the effectiveness of the vaccines, as well as some new safety data as well on the vaccines. So I think the good news is that we are now accumulating evidence that show that vaccination is protective against COVID-19, as well as also protective against several of the new variants. And this has come up many times on these webinars. So there's a new study that was done that showed that amongst individuals who had received the mRNA vaccine, that they actually did quite well in terms of protection against the B.1.1.7 variant that was first reported from UK, as well as also from the other variant, which was first reported, B.1.351, which is first reported in South Africa. And so this is really good news, accumulating good news from a variety of different sources. We also have reassuring data in terms of the longevity or durability of protection. There have been several studies that show that looked at not only the antibody level over time, that's one of the protective parts of the immune system, but also that people who have been vaccinated do have these cells in their bodies that can then respond to the potential, protect the individual and respond against any infection, potential exposure and infection. And this is very valuable to know this information, because now we know that there's both protection from the antibody side of the immune system, as well as what we call the cellular side of the immune system. So this is also good news in terms of the durability of protection. There's still some questions in terms of protection from the new variant that's been identified, particularly in India, B1617 variant. And the studies are really very small number of, um, of, of isolates have been looked at, and the studies are inconclusive one way or the other. But I anticipate that over the next several weeks, we will get more information regarding this, including information from the UK, where they're encouraging data in terms of protection against that new variant that's been identified in India. In terms of safety, I think the good news is that we still continue to accumulate good data regarding safety, particularly amongst pregnant women. As you know, the CDC keeps track of a large database amongst pregnant women. And again, the evidence thus far is reassuring. No unusual side effects have been noted in pregnant women, and which is good news. And also the other information suggests that also pregnant women do have a similar response in terms of their antibody response to the vaccine compared to non-pregnant persons. They're still accumulating information in terms of baby outcomes, neonatal outcomes, because obviously you need to follow the women, the pregnant persons until they have the baby, and then so you can identify any potential risks in the neonate. And that will take time till there are enough babies that are born for these pregnant women that have been vaccinated. So, there's accumulating data also on that front as well. So maybe I'll stop here, Donna, and hand it to you, and we can tackle some of the questions.
Great, thank you. Actually, I'm going to turn to Jerry because there are a number of questions that are showing up in the Q&A box, and please, we encourage you to drop your questions in there. We are trying to answer them online, and we always accumulate them afterwards if we don't get to them live, and then try to update our FAQs. But Jerry, there are quite a few questions still about people working remotely. And the question really revolves around, I am going to be working 100% remotely. Do I still need to get vaccinated? And I thought it would be helpful for you to clarify what the new work environment will look like, and if in fact 100% remote is a likely option.
So I think this question really does have two components to it. One is working remotely, and the other is the vaccine policy, the mandate laid over on top of that. As far as the new work environment is concerned, there is likely to be some significant proportion of our population that will work remotely, even into the fall, some even beyond. But rarely is that going to be 100% remote. It's not that it's never, it's not that there are no cases. Just as in the past, we always had some people who worked 100% remotely because the unit felt that that was appropriate in terms of its own needs. But I think for your planning purposes, you should assume that while some of you will still be working remotely, in all likelihood, that's going to mean hybrid, some number of days on campus and some number of days off. Next important point about all of this is that this isn't a university level determination. The question of where people work, when they return, how all of this plays out, this is a unit level matter. This is for your school and your department, and you should be looking to them. So when I say that it will be unusual for people to work 100% remotely, I don't mean because the university isn't allowing it. It's because of my expectation that few units are going to make that a common practice, that most schools and departments are likely to say either all must come back or all must at least be working in a hybrid model. All right, if you're working on, so now let me return to the question about vaccine mandate and how does it apply? There's no dispute about the person who was working on a hybrid basis. If you're spending some time remote and some time on campus, you have to be vaccinated. Unless you get an exemption, you are surely covered by the mandate in that situation. If you are 100% remote, and that's a pretty small number of cases, I'd be interested in what others on this panel would say about that. My own view is that you certainly should be vaccinated, that there is no basis for thinking that because you're 100% remote, you shouldn't be. And indeed, I would say that our mandate is of all employees. But when it comes to enforcement, our principal enforcement mechanism is to say you can't come onto our premises if you are not vaccinated. So, what happens to you if you are 100% remote? I guess my feeling is that that's probably not inconsistent with the mandate, or at least we have no way to make you do it. But just one final comment for me on this. This is a very delicate question that I'm talking about right now, because I know there are some people out there who don't want to be vaccinated, who know that they don't qualify for one of the exemptions, but really just don't want to be vaccinated. They're uncomfortable about it for one reason or another. And I'm afraid of conveying the impression that if you're one of those people, you should just elect to stay remote, and then you won't have to be vaccinated. And that's not how this works. That the decision about whether you are remote and under what circumstances is not something that we each as employees make for ourselves. That's something that the unit determines. So again, there's no election to stay remote in order to avoid the mandate. Just given the importance of this, Donna, I wonder if you or Wafa or Melanie wanted to add to what I've said, or clarify any part.
I think that was great. There was one other related question that I was going to answer. I thought it's better to answer live, much like you gave nuance to your answer. And it was a question from a faculty member who wants to know if they are only teaching online and live outside of New York State, are they required to complete testing and or vaccine? And I think Jerry's comments apply not only to staff, but also to faculty. So if for years you've been teaching remote and that's been the only mode of instruction, then yes, it's reasonable, again, if your department says they want you to continue that way, that you would continue teaching remote and not have to get vaccinated. If your teaching remote has only coincided with the COVID pandemic, then you might need to check the assumption that you are going to continue to teach remote, because President Bollinger announced that he would like all faculty to return to online instruction. So again, based on the circumstances of your school or your department, but highly unlikely unless this has been the mode of instruction in the past.
Could I just jump in there, Donna? You misspoke. You said that to return to online instruction. I think what you meant was to return to in-person instruction.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that. We're going to turn to a question about the religious exemption and ask Melanie if she could give a little more detail on what would make an application for a religious exemption to be denied.
Right. So the religious exemption process it's really a limited number, and it's those who, through their religious practices, have sincerely and deeply held religious beliefs that that go against the practice of vaccination. These are very limited, and that is why we do require the documentation as well as the backup documentation from the religious organization within which you participate to support that application. So those who participate, those who practice within those religions, I think generally are aware where there are constraints around the practice of immunization within their religion.
Great, thank you. Wafa, I'm going to turn to you. The CDC website states that getting vaccinated is a personal choice. If you're able to prove through a PCR or rapid test that you are negative, why is vaccination the sole mandate?
Well, I think it's important to understand why to get vaccinated. And the reason to get vaccinated is to protect yourself, to protect your family, as well as to protect the community, the Columbia community. That's the reason for the vaccination and for the vaccination mandate. It is impossible to use for people to get tested every single day to detect a potential infection, on a very frequent basis. So I think that the most now, with the availability of these very highly effective vaccines and safe vaccines, it behooves individuals who don't have a legitimate medical or religious exemption to get vaccinated to protect themselves and others around them. Rather than depending on testing, which is usually can only be done episodically.
Great, thank you, Wafa. There are a few questions that I'm going to put in the category of capacity and distancing, and I'll try to answer them instead of typing out multiple answers. So right now we have previously had a requirement that we have 50% capacity. So if a room could hold 100, we could only have 50 in it. That capacity limit is now over. We can fill that room with 100 people. However, we still are required to do 6-foot distancing. That means we can't fill the room with 100. So we are still under that requirement. It's something that we have appealed to the state of New York, particularly given the fact that we will have roughly 100% of faculty, staff, and students vaccinated. So we're waiting to hear that, but for now, we still are required to do 6-foot distancing, whether it's in an elevator or in an auditorium. Okay, I'm going to turn to Wafa. This is a question about gathering size and occupancy. It tees off of what I just spoke about. So we know that we can have 100% capacity, but could you tell us a little bit about some of our gathering size limits and whether or not those will be changed as we go forward?
Yes, I think we should definitely, I think we're all looking at every aspect of the measures that we have in place, whether they be the plans for the testing program or the masking or the distancing and capacity and so on over time. So what we're talking about is today at present. So I need to just to remind people that this is rapidly evolving situation. So currently, of course, for outdoor gatherings, again, the threshold is for 50 social gatherings, non-academic gatherings outdoors is for 50 individuals. However, for indoors, we restrict that to 25 individuals for non-academic gatherings.
Great, thank you. Melanie, we have a question about gateway testing. The question is, what days of the week can someone get a gateway test?
Thank you for that. So gateway testing is still required to come to campus. Anyone who has not been on campus since after January 4th, will have a red pass because they haven't met the gateway testing requirement. And that's going to continue through into the fall. So if you haven't been back on campus, you are going to need a gateway test. You can do that now. You can wait till closer to the fall. It is right now available Monday through Friday at the 2 locations at the Lerner Hall on the Morningside campus and at CUIMC. So check the website, covid19.columbia.edu. We do update that as the hours change. There are also limited days and availability at West 51st Street, Lamont, and Tarrytown. Right now, Monday through Friday, and certainly a requirement you can take care of as early as you're able to. Again, anyone who's had a gateway test after January 4th will not need to repeat that in the fall.
Melanie, another question for you. When will the guidelines for undergraduate and graduate students for vaccines be published?
So in terms of the vaccine mandate, that's already been shared through multiple messages. The students got their first messaging back in April. I sent them subsequent messaging last week. We have already received thousands of uploads of documentation from students, and we're continuing to work with the schools around ensuring the students get their documentation uploaded. We're processing the vaccinations through the usual student health records and the compliance and doing the notification. So that is actively ongoing, and the messaging will continue through the summer. We've also been doing parallel to this webinars with students, domestic and international students, to address their questions in the same way we are doing with our faculty and staff.
Melanie, can you share the website link to sign up for a vaccine at Columbia Health?
Yes, if I can, I will post it at secure.health.columbia.edu, I believe.
Yeah,
but it's on the website. I know, I should know that, but now you're putting me on the spot.
And also you can sign up for a vaccination at vaccinetogethernewyork.org. That'll get you into any of the non-Lerner Hall sites. Okay. We have some questions about emergency use authorization. Wafa, if you could talk about that, and does that impact in any way our ability and the ability of other schools to mandate the vaccine?
As indicated by, I think, Donna, on that there are many, now hundreds of colleges and universities that have put in place a mandate for vaccine mandates for diversity of their community, knowing quite well that what we have now are largely authorized vaccines and not fully approved. I think, as I mentioned in my few comments, the accumulating data in terms of safety are quite reassuring, and it's a matter of time, that's needed for the companies that made these vaccines to be able to collect the data that are accumulating and submit that to the FDA for the FDA to review for full approval. So I think that I would encourage people to keep an eye on the accumulating data on safety, which I think is very encouraging, that demonstrate now that beyond, we're getting to be almost 9 months for some people who've been vaccinated with these early vaccines. We already have quite a substantial body of evidence in terms of the safety of these vaccines. So hopefully that'd be reassuring until the FDA has the opportunity to review the full proposals by the companies.
Great, thank you, Wafa. Melanie, I'm turning to you a question about gateway testing. If someone has to expose themselves to strangers who are outside of their pod by getting on public transportation to come to campus to get a gateway test, how does that provide us any assurance that the person is indeed virus-free as their gateway test is clear in that one moment?
I think this kind of applies to our behavior just generally, right? And as Jerry kind of started this with, everything's opening up more and more. People are coming out of their pods. People are participating in more events and activities. So it's continued to take those same precautions as you go about those activities. So if you are riding public transportation, masking is required on public transportation. So, even if everyone around you isn't necessarily complying, you protect yourself by doing so and keeping yourself safe as you then come to campus. And any test, the gateway test, any ongoing test, only tells us your status at the moment that you got tested. But that's why, when you think about the whole Swiss cheese model that we're using, testing is one piece of it, vaccination is another piece of it, distancing, hygiene, masking. We're putting all of these precautions and safety measures together to assure the safety of our campus. And I think our track record over the last 15 months shows that using all of these in combination is what works. We're not looking at one on its own. So just making sure you're continuing to take all the additional precautions.
Thank you. Melanie, another question about COVID testing. Are we going to consider offering COVID testing for immediate family members?
So in terms of our testing centers, no, we are continuing to limit those to Columbia affiliates. I think we've all seen the availability of testing has just exploded, where, similar to what we've seen with vaccines in a way, where demand was outstripping supply early on. That is no longer the case. It's really easy to find locations for COVID testing, including now availability of at-home testing. So we encourage everyone, if you're looking for testing for family members, to use the city and the state resources, which can direct you to testing sites, as well as looking at some of the at-home, depending on what your reason is for wanting to be tested. I know a lot of people are looking for things related to travel, and you can certainly look at some of these at-home options for that.
Melanie, another testing question is, why is it that Columbia will not accept a COVID test from a non-Columbia facility?
Yeah, this is a question we've been asked a lot throughout, and we've really had a singular standard for our testing program since day one last June, and we continue to have that, in that there are many tests out there, and a lot of them have got varying levels of sensitivity and specificity. We have been using the same testing vendor throughout at all of our sites, and at least for that initial gateway test, and our ongoing testing, where we're really trying to have this underlying understanding of our prevalence on campus, underlying look at what is happening if there's any infections that we're seeing or any clusters. We want to assure that we have a consistent test that we are using. So that is why we've held firm to this requirement that that test must be done at one of our facilities through our process.
Great. Melanie, one last one, then I'll let you take a break. Will additional safety restrictions be enforced? For example, masking, additional testing, social distancing for people who obtain medical or religious exemptions from the vaccine?
Yeah, certainly there will be additional guidance for those with an approved exemption, and they are likely to include additional testing as well as masking. And that is really because anyone who receives an approved exemption has not been vaccinated and therefore is potentially at risk themselves, right? As a vaccinated person isn't at that higher level of risk, and we want to make sure those who do have an approved exemption reduce that likelihood of risk, as well as us being able to get the information that we need. So testing, masking, distancing may all be required, and information will be provided to individuals receiving the exemption regarding the additional precautions they need to take.
All right, I'm going to turn to Wafa. This is a different question. Are there any data on vaccination for breastfeeding women and the effects on their nursing children?
No, not really. I mean, I think there are some data that look at the level of antibodies in the breast milk, but that's about it. And like I mentioned, there are still a limited number of babies that have been born to pregnant persons who've been vaccinated. So we continue to accumulate this information. But similar to other antibodies, remember, a person who's pregnant, the antibodies they have in their own body is transmitted to the baby through the placenta, and the antibodies to the virus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, COVID-19 itself, is acts very similar to other antibodies that are transmitted from a pregnant person to their baby.
Thank you, Wafa. We also have a couple of questions about the booster shot. A few people are concerned. They got the vaccine in December, so we're getting very close to the 6-month window. Should they be overly concerned about not being able to get the booster shot?
Yeah, I think we still don't know whether we will need a booster shot and when. So neither when nor whether we'll need a booster shot. And I'm not really sure where the 6-month window period came from. So as I mentioned before, it's just that the research, they're measuring the antibody levels at different time points. Last time point they looked at was 6 months. So it's just the duration of follow-up thus far. It doesn't mean that after 6 months, there'll be a rapid drop-off in terms of the antibodies or in terms of those cells that I mentioned before that are dormant in our own bodies that can protect us against the virus. So all of this remains to be seen in terms of, whether we need a booster shot, what kind of a booster shot, and when that will be needed.
Great, thank you. Melanie, a question about international students who aren't vaccinated. Can they attend classes as long as they are masked?
Yes, our intention for these students is to ensure they get vaccinated as soon as they arrive in the United States, but understanding, as I described, there is a time lag between getting vaccination and being considered fully vaccinated. We want to be able to allow them to attend safely. So we'll put those same additional precautions we have in place for those who receive a medical or religious exemption in place temporarily for those who are in the process of getting vaccinated. So we'll likely include masking and regular testing until they are fully vaccinated.
Great, thank you. Wafa, I'm going to turn to you a question about COVID and antibodies. Question is, if you had COVID and received the monoclonal antibody infusion, and after 90 days you still have an extremely high antibody count, should you wait before getting the vaccine to avoid adverse reactions?
We don't have any data in terms of for example, that individuals who have high antibody titers after an episode of COVID-19, that such individuals will have a more severe side effects when they're vaccinated. There are no data to support this premise. And therefore, I think so long as you fulfill the duration of time since receiving the monoclonal antibodies, I would say that you should seek to get vaccinated.
Great, thank you. Wafa, one more for you. Could you say more about breakthrough infections of fully vaccinated individuals? How concerned should we be about this?
Yeah, there are. I mean, I think from day one, we knew that the vaccines are not 100% protective. I mean, ultimately, the reason to, the most critical reason to, rationale to get vaccinated is really to protect the individual from severe disease and the hospitalizations and so on and so forth. So we knew from day, and there are data now that certainly support that and confirm that the vaccines protect against severe illness, as well as also decrease the risk of milder kinds of COVID-19 episodes. But it's not 100%. So it's not surprising that there will be some people who will be tested and will be positive, even though they've been fully vaccinated. Most of the information that is available thus far indicate that it's a very small fraction of individuals who've been vaccinated that have at least been documented in a study that the CDC did recently, have been documented to have what's called breakthrough infections, and that in most of these individuals do not have a severe illness. They tend to have either no symptoms or mild symptoms.
Jerry, I'm going to turn to you. We have a couple questions about what the consequences are of faculty and staff who do not get a religious or medical exemption, but who still don't want to be vaccinated.
So again, a hard question to answer. I wish I could say a simple and definitive answer. It will be this, it will not be that. The fact is, it will be an HR problem. What you're describing is somebody who will be out of compliance with our rules. So what I can say is that person will not be allowed on campus. If, in other words, that person who is neither vaccinated nor found to be exempt will not have an election to continue to come to campus. So what will happen to that person? Well, by the same token that they can't elect to come to campus, they don't have any kind of automatic election to continue working remotely or to start working remotely in order to stay on the payroll without being vaccinated. So that's not going to be an automatic option either. There may be, what is I think going to happen here is a case-by-case determination made by HR personnel in consultation with the employee of what is the appropriate response or sanction in a case like that. I want to stress, our goal here is not to fire anybody. This isn't about termination. This is about bringing people into compliance with the requirement for the safety of our community as a whole. So exactly what this is going to mean to you during the period in which you're not able to come to campus, that's going to have to be worked out on a case-by-case basis. But please, our plea is that you not put us to the test on this, that you just resolve your doubts. And I know some of you do have doubts, but resolve them in favor of getting vaccinated. It's good for you. It's good for the whole community.
Thank you, Jerry. Melanie, a question about new employees, and this applies for students as well, arriving from abroad who will start September 1st, but can't get vaccinated in their own countries. How will Columbia Health or Columbia doctors help them?
Yeah, we will be making sure that we have vaccine available for those who have been unable to get vaccinated in an international location as soon as they arrive, and offering hopefully a variety of vaccines if the supply allows us, so that they can get vaccinated as soon as possible, and in the intervening period until they are fully vaccinated, providing them with the guidance around testing, masking, distancing, and other precautions to keep them and the remainder of our population safe. This really is an issue that should only apply to those coming in from international destinations because of the widespread availability of vaccine across the 50 states. For anyone who is domestic, there is the expectation this process will be completed prior to the return to campus.
And Jerry, will that employee, in the case of an employee, will they be unable to work during that period of time when they're getting their presumably 2 doses or maybe 1 dose of the vaccine, and as Melanie pointed out, the 14-day period after? Or can they start right away by wearing a face covering?
Well, I think our rules say that you have to be fully vaccinated. So I don't believe there is a grace period built in that would allow you to start late and just work as if you were already fully vaccinated. So please don't delay. Melanie, do you?
Yeah, I would say the only exemption is international. So if you've been unable to get it, that's why I was trying to differentiate, sorry to make it confusing, between the domestic and the international. International, we manage almost like a temporary, you get a temporary exemption just during that time period where we put in additional precautions. And obviously it will be determined based on what your role is, if that determination is that you need to wait to start. But that's only for international if you're coming from a location where there hasn't been access to vaccines. So that's not even true for all international locations. So these really will be managed case by case, dependent on role, location, etc. So, but as Jerry said, if you have access, don't delay.
Great, thank you. There's a question I'm going to answer, which is somebody who wants to know, when they return to campus and in instruction, students and instructors are likely to be wearing masks, where this person might have a hearing problem or rely on lip reading. What is their option? And their option in this case is to file for an accommodation. It obviously isn't a medical or a religious exemption per se, but there are other ways that we can accommodate that particular circumstance. Okay, WAFA, a common concern for women in childbearing years that there's little to no data, as mentioned, of a woman getting vaccinated, then pregnant, then having a child and knowing the effects. Why is the vaccine being mandated without this information being known?
I think I want to just stress to everybody that the data that we have available to us thus far definitely support the fact that the benefits of getting vaccinated far outweigh the risk, particularly because pregnant women have now been shown to be much more likely to have severe complications of COVID-19. And also in a very recent study, these women also appeared to have also some poorer outcomes in terms of their neonates, their babies. So I think this gives us even more of an impetus to say getting COVID-19 during pregnancy is a very serious condition. And if at all possible, to get vaccinated to prevent a pregnant person from getting COVID-19, that would be highly advisable. Of course, obviously, decisions regarding an individual getting vaccinated, particularly a pregnant person getting vaccinated, should be done in conversations with the provider to be able to get to have a detailed conversation and to get their advice. But I think there's a lot of concern now because there's more and more data that suggests that pregnant persons who do get COVID are more likely to have complications due to COVID-19 itself.
I'll give you one last question, then I'm going to turn it back to Jerry to wrap us up. If those getting the vaccine are protected from COVID-19, why should anyone care if I am not? I would not pose a threat to those who are vaccinated.
Well, the question is, like we said before, is that it is not 100% protective, the vaccination in itself. And just in the prior question, that's what I mentioned, is that it is not 100% protection. And therefore, it's important for both people who are in your community, in the environment where you are, who are unvaccinated, as well as for those who get vaccinated. And keep in mind that in most contexts, we don't know. It's unknown who's vaccinated, who's not vaccinated. And I think that makes it imperative that, again, that people should care about who's around them and try to protect themselves and others as much as possible.
Great. Thank you. That's a great ending. We had over 168 questions that came up. We tried to answer what we could in the chat box, but we will take a look at all the questions we got and adapt our FAQs. And I'll turn it back to Jerry to wrap us up.
Just 1 second to express thanks, as always, to our 3 expert panelists for their great answers, but also to add a word of thanks to the people in CUIT and in the Human Resources Department who worked so hard to put together this technology that's being used now to gather this information. So thanks and great admiration to them for the work they did. Thanks all. See you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.